Welcome to Invisible No More, the podcast where we explore triumphs over trauma and the powerful journeys of healing and resilience. I'm your host, Shannon Huff, and together we'll shine a light on the stories of strength, hope, and the paths we forge to reclaim our lives. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to episode 12. We're still here with Angela and so excited to continue the conversation and just really get into a bit more on advocating for yourself, I'm going to say, because it's so important to speak up for yourself, have people that have your back, and know that there's always those opportunities that people will take, and you have to be your biggest advocate, your biggest ally. We talked a lot about your first initial experiences in the military. Mm-hmm. For you, unfortunately, it started almost from day one. And, that's heartbreaking. But you have a little bit more to your story.
Yes.
And I know I'm just going to do a warning right now. This can be triggering. If you need to talk to someone after you listen to the podcast, make sure you call those numbers that, we like to give, dial 988, press 1, the National Suicide Hotline. Call me. We'll talk. But if you want to go a little bit deeper into your story and share a little bit more about what you experienced.
Before I talked about kind of my experience wrapped up in the career field portion of it. But I had some medical issues arising throughout my enlistment, and it came to a point where one of the issues required surgery. And when I was waking up, still kind of groggy, I kept feeling the bed sheet kind of, I get that cool sensation of the bed sheet kind of wafting. And when you're waking up, you don't really know what's going on. And then I'm starting waking up a little bit more, and I could feel touching down below. And I just kept thinking, oh, they're checking. Your first thought is to make a logic sense of it.
Right.
I'm in a hospital. I've had surgery. But as I became more coherent, I actually woke up to, I don't know the ranks in Army. I was on an Army post. A young man, probably 19, 20, 21, actually with his fingers inserted. And I just was kind of waking up, and it kind of snapped me a little faster. I'm like, what are you doing? And he kind of jumped up and kind of smiling as he left, saying, I was just checking the bedding, making sure you had the right padding underneath. And just like, okay, what just happened? And so I kind of gathered my thoughts a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to call. And I hit the nurse's button, and he came walking in with a really big smile. How can I help you? And I was just like, never mind. I didn't, just kind of frozen. And so because I was awake, my husband at the time, I married young. Don't recommend that.
We all do it in the military.
Yeah, we do, 5 months in. But he had come in, and I told him what happened. And at first, he's, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. And so I feel like more out of an obligation, he went out and he spoke to a female nurse and said, this is what happened. And she kind of is like, she was kind of out of it, coming to, we can have hallucinations and things like that. And so he came in and said, well, this is what she said. So what do you want to do about it? And by that time, because of all the experiences, I'm like, nothing, just get me out of here. And I kind of rushed the process of getting out, and I ended up having to stay an extra hour because I kept throwing up because I was trying to get out too soon. I was trying to escape the hospital. So it just was chalked up as another, oh, well, could have been worse.
How scary. One, you're at your most vulnerable.
And that's why I was afraid, too. That's why I wanted to ask for permission or to talk to you and give you the heads up before telling that story, because it is a position where I don't want to discourage women from being fearful of having medical care that they need and require, because at the end of it, you are going to be in that vulnerable state as you're waking up.
Yeah.
And the fear, again, with the military, and we talked about, briefly about it before, is a lot of these positions, the people aren't vetted for it. It's like, you got the right score, we have this position open, plunk.
Unless you have a high security clearance, you're not really vetted that much.
No.
You're
No.
like background check, kind of. Do you have a criminal record? Which even now,
Right.
our recruiting standards have changed so
Yes.
drastically. I mean,
It says, you're here, you want to go in, here's a position, and
yeah.
whether it's the appropriate person for it or
Yeah.
not. I dated somebody who was in the medical field, and he would call me and say, look like you got some really crappy results today. I'm like, get out of my military records. Get out of my medical records.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but he had authorization.
Oh.
He worked there. So he's like, don't forget you have an appointment today. I'm like, get out of my records.
Well, talk about HIPAA. But, I will say, I think there's been a lot of newer safeguards put in place. Cameras everywhere. Like, I had surgery this is when I had my first knee surgery. And when I came out, I had this weird burn on my leg. And I was like, why would I have a burn? It's not like he burned my leg. He cut
Right.
my leg open and did a couple things. And,
Right.
and so they went back and looked at the video to see where I would have gotten the burn from.
Right.
Like, he was very adamant. I didn't have anything that would burn you. Come to find out, the tape had burned my leg.
Oh, geez.
But they were able to do that. And I
I
think
could only imagine how things different. I mean,
yeah.
simple like a laundry room, a stairwell.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, all I need, laundry room, stairwell, and the warehouse. Those
Yeah.
three alone would have nipped, I think, years of the fear of not being believed, and how, looking back, I mean, I always knew it transferred into my day-to-days. But the
Yeah.
retreat really helped me kind of put aside that trauma and see the aftermath of how it rolled into my day, into my choices, into who I led in my life, what I allowed, recognizing that I showed way too much grace to others while not giving myself any. And
Yeah.
finding that balance is, I will give you grace as long as you take accountability.
Right.
And having the experience at the retreat, again, putting that trauma aside so I can see the rest of the picture, helped me start really connecting and how it affected so many chains of events later on. So
while we have the opportunity,
Yeah.
since we decided to add on to your episodes, and I so appreciate that. I know it wasn't easy. At the retreat, you took a lot of time and left several times while others were around and kind of working on things. And I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. I was like, where did Angela go?
I left my doll behind for everybody to.
Yeah. Like, where did that doll come from? And I kind of was thinking maybe you were feeling like you said, it wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad. She had it worse. She had it worse. And maybe just some gathering of emotions, things like that.
It was a lot of that too.
There was the retreats are a lot of emotion for a reason. And, we try and break it up, like
Right.
spitting marshmallows at the fire and things like that.
Fluff,
Fluff
fluff.
puffing. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Shout out to Julie. Talk a little bit about what you were feeling during the retreat and how when you left, things were different.
Well, I had a couple of reasons why I didn't go to a lot of veteran events. But one of them was just that. I've heard the stories. And who am I to come in and take time away from women who really need these services? Who am I to come in and say, oh, poor me, look at me, I deserve, because with that INFJ personality, I see everything. It's like, I understand that as a veteran, I have certain benefits and services, but what about the women who experience these things outside? I always find a way to minimize my voice, my position. Yeah, but, women outside the military have this happen as well. Those women have had it worse, so I'm not going to take away from them if it's something they need. So that was one of the things that always prevented me. But I did go to one in June where I met Jane, and she's the one that told me about this retreat. And I'm like, oh, this is a big one. This is, how do I justify having something this extravagant, this kind of an opportunity? Do I really need something like this when this can easily be filled by somebody who has had more of a genuine PTSD situation? But my husband kind of nudged me out the door. Your voice matters, your voice matters, your voice matters. And, little things add up. PTSD and CPTSD are one and the same, complex over time. So he nudged me out, and I think a lot of the reasons I kind of kept excusing myself was one, over the years with, experiences that I've carried from the military, experiences of being a special needs mom. That comes with a lot of fighting and not being heard as well. It just seemed to be the continuing factor in my life. I've become very introverted. Believe it or not, I can talk, but most of the time I choose not to. I feel when I do talk, I hyper-explain. I make things awkward.
You mentioned that a couple times.
Yes, I make things awkward, and then I don't know how to backpedal my way out of it. So it was a constant way of checking myself. Am I sharing too much? If I'm not sharing enough, am I taking away from anyone else who needs it more? I'm also very much someone that if I feel something bubbling up, I'm going to make a joke about it. Let's make a joke, and let's lighten the mood. At the retreat, I never had the urge, and the emotions just bubbled up and overflowed. I'm not used to that. I'm not used to talking, somebody. I'm not used to that. I'm very much my grandfather's granddaughter, Finland, Sisu. Perseverance. You keep going. You don't think you can, but you keep going. And so I'm not a victim. I can handle this. I don't need all this help. Give it to somebody who needs it. So being at the retreat and actually sitting there with that trauma in my lap and saying, it mattered so much that I filled 4 pages in that letter. And I noticed none of it was about the events, but everything was the aftermath of the effects. My trauma was found more in not what kept happening, but the responses to what kept happening, nothing. And how it translated into my life, and how in very critical points in my life, whether it's for my children in court after the divorce, where I really needed to have a strong voice, I was so scared to use it. I was too afraid to use it. They won't believe me. It's not enough. It won't be. And just that constant pit that carried with me every time I talked to people. So me leaving was just constantly putting my checks and balance, logic behind the emotion, trying to sometimes put away the logic and just feel it.
Right.
So it was just, and it's another thing is I was confused. I wouldn't have been able to explain what was going on in this hot mess of my head to anybody. So I just excused myself so I could kind of unravel the craziness and take a breath and come back in.
One of the things I'm going to point out to you.
Hold me accountable. That's a good.
I'm going to hold you accountable,
Please
but
do.
I'm also
I'm okay
going
with that.
to validate something for you. Trauma is trauma. There's no 50 million different definitions in trauma. And when you started telling your story in episode 11, you started bouncing your legs. You started touching your face. Your voice started shaking. There's a reason we don't tell our stories. I mean, eventually, sometimes they come out. But at retreats, we don't tell our stories. You write it down for a reason. Because it doesn't matter how bad your story is. You might not have been full-on assaulted. You might not have had a story like mine, which is a very hard story. You still are experiencing the outcome. Like we say, MST is not a verb.
Right.
You can't MST me.
Right.
But you can assault me. You can harass me. You can betray me. And that all equals trauma.
Right.
And it's all sexually related. And it was in the military.
Right.
So I think one of the biggest things I want you to walk away from any experience with Shilda Sisters is that your story is valid. Your trauma is valid. But what I see in you, just a change from the Friday you walked into the retreat until today, is someone who has found their voice and is putting in the work,
Right.
but also has a network that believes you,
Yes.
that understands that none of our stories are the same,
Right.
but they're all similar.
The retreat
We're-
helped put a stopper.
Right.
Because, like, in the service, it was just continue. Even in life, I get continual reminders where whether my voice was heard or not, to me, I'm afraid they're not going to hear me. I'm afraid they're not going to believe me. And to this day, I still have examples around me of people's voices that are being heard that I'm like, how come you heard her?
Right.
How come they got the time? How come? But that retreat kind of put a stopper in. It doesn't matter. You know, the unfairness is there. The unfairness is going to be around you, but it doesn't have to be a trigger every single time.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a validation that you're not enough, but they are. You know, it just kind of helped put those voices away so I could focus on myself. I could focus on recognizes choices I made along the way because of what had happened or what my fears were, and what to do with some of my choices. Some were guilt, some are shame, some, you know, a little bit of both. But now it's time to not only, like, the retreat helped me heal from what happened, but it also gave me the strength to confront some of the choices I made after it happened.
Right.
And not have shame or guilt. I understand why I did what I did. Now it's my responsibility to approach it, fix it, and heal from the aftermath as well.
Right. Right.
So,
And that's part of the journey, right? Recognizing some of the things we did after the fact, because I know how I was raised. I know my morals. But sometimes after my trauma, the things I did
are challenged.
Are so not me.
Right.
But it was like I had no say. And actually, there's a podcast that's coming out. It's the next podcast in the list. Bethany talks about how, you know, when you're in a heightened PTSD place and your heart rate is going so fast, your brain cannot make sound decisions. You're
trying to breathe.
You're trying to breathe. And in that moment, you have no rational abilities. And I think that happens to us a lot. And, you know, we go back into that flight, fight, or freeze. And a lot of times for me, it was fight.
Right.
You know, I'm going to fight, not like physically, but I'm going to fight and do anything I can to get back at people that have hurt me.
Right.
But in reality, I was just hurting myself.
I was a fawn. I want to prove myself. I'm a good person. I'll do anything for you because my voice doesn't matter, but yours does to me.
Yeah. And that's something that you're going to have to continue working on.
Yes.
To understand that your voice, your trauma, your aftermath is just as important as others. No one person deserves more than another. Will it take some people longer and they have more in-depth stuff to fix?
Right.
Maybe. But that's part of trauma and PTSD and anything psychological, really.
Right.
I mean, I'm no counselor by trade. I have a degree in politics and business. So, you know, but I do know what I've been through. And I know, you know, we have to realize that all of our stories are different, but we all deserve to be heard and to be validated.
Right.
And to find restoration.
And I have to stop putting, I always put myself, I always say I'm on the bottom of the totem pole.
But
because
you're not.
I know. And I need to not feel guilty about nudging myself up a little bit more.
Absolutely.
I can be beside my kids. My kids don't always have to be above me.
Yeah.
And I can be beside my husband. I don't always have to, you know. He's not very good at letting me put him first, though. I mean, he's been a blessing that way.
Yeah.
He makes sure we're side by side, not one above the other.
And that's definitely a positive in the healing journey.
It is.
So Well, we've reached the end again.
Again?
I know, another
I have
episode.
nothing else hidden
You have
under, I promise.
nothing else you're going to do. Okay. Thank you. And I know this episode was hard, but I think ending it on a note of understanding that just because your story might not be as rough as somebody else's, or, we all deserve to be better.
Mm-hmm.
We all deserve to find a healing place and to speak up. But again, with the triggers, make sure you talk to someone, reach out. But thank you again for sharing more of your story. I know it was hard. And thank you for being an advocate for yourself right now and believing in yourself. You are a work in progress, and I'm going to watch you for a while. You're stuck with me in your network of sisters that we've created.
Works for me.
So awesome. Well,
Thank you
for joining us, and we'll see you again on the next episode.
Thank you for those in our Founder Circle: Walmart, Superbio, Sauk County Veteran Service Office, and USAA for your continued support. If you're interested in joining our Founder Circle, reach out to me at shannon@shieldofsisters.com or 608-344-0210. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on our newest episodes of Invisible No More podcast.